Chennai 365, an effort by SKS in association with social, sports and cultural bodies to do good to a vibrant Chennai.
Om Shri Sai Ram, offering my most humble loving pranams to the divine lotus feet of our beloved Bhagwan. It's indeed a privilege and pleasure to be here in this evening today. As Brother Ramesh Sharma mentioned, it's a dream for many of the chartered accountants within the Satya Sai organization and community that we wanted to have a study circle for the chartered accountants and finance professionals. That dream has come today, and it's wonderful occasion to have with us Nandakumar sir. Is also from the income tax. He is IRS official, additional commissioner. So it's a very important occasion, sir, for all of us that you are here and inaugurating this study circle. Brother Ramesh Sharma mentioned about the IAS study circle and also the advocate study circle. In fact, for your information, sir, the IAS study circle was started by none other than Mr. Rangarao, who was the chief secretary at that time in the government. He was the chief secretary of Tamil Nadu. And the advocate study circle was started by none other than Justice Karpag Vinayagam, sir. He was the justice of the Supreme Court, and he later on went on to become the chairman of the Electricity Commission. So we do have wonderful luminaries who have inaugurated the respective study circles, and we are very fortunate to have you here. And thank you very much for spending your time today evening with us. We have been very thankful to Mr. Murali for supporting us in all our endeavors. Many of you may be aware that he has supported our advocate study circle for a very long time, and today he has been very wonderfully supporting our efforts on forming this the Chartered Accountant Study Circle. Thank you once again, sir, for being with us today. Today's topic is on the ethics. Okay, we always in the profession, being a chartered accountant myself, we have had wonderful experiences, Bhagwan teaching us most of whatever we have learned from the Chartered Accountant Institute. We have learned much more from Bhagwan. But when it comes to the office and practical environment, we always face a dilemma when clients ask us questions where there is a thin line between evasion and planning. Okay, I don't have to explain more, but that's a dilemma we all face in the day-to-day office. And believe me, we have always, in our office, as a policy, we always ensure that we follow the law of the land. Because Bhagwan, apart from giving the 9-point code of conduct, there is also a 10-fold path to divinity. And in that 10-fold path to divinity, he has mentioned very clearly, follow the law of the land wherever you are, whichever part of the world you are in. So these are some of the teachings that we apply on a practical day-to-day basis. And this study circle, in my view, will enable all of us to put into practice whatever we have learnt, not necessarily from the Institute of Chartered Accountants, but from Bhagwan's own teachings and messages and guidance that we have received. We will have more of this to come. We have a wonderful set of speakers today. Plus, the request to the organizing team is, this is not a one-day wonder or a one-day affair. This is something that, for the information of all of you, the IAS Study Circle is also conducting their program today, and they are doing their 240th session. It's almost 20 years now since they formed. So in 20 years' time, we will have a much better gathering and much better audience, so we will be very happy to host that and continue that as well. I want to quote some of Bhagwan's messages on this very momentous occasion. Many of you may be aware, in the year 2009, there was a conference in Puttaparthi, which said that was a conference on world of ethics and the world of finance. That conference was held during August 2009. And I'm going to quote some of the points from Bhagwan's discourse during that conference. Okay? And to do that, it's a verbatim quote from Bhagwan, which I want all of you to keep in mind whenever you do whatever in your day-to-day office work. Bhagwan says, Daiva Preeti, Papa Bhiti and Sangha Niti, that is love for God, fear of sin and morality in society, are three very fundamental principles that a professional should have in mind. And he also goes on to say, so let us foster morality in society. People will gather around you, treating you as a good person. First and foremost, develop love for God. The next is fear of sin. It is only when you cultivate this quality that you will become a person of character. When you have a noble character, the entire society will love you. None will hate you. Maintain good character and love all. Love is everywhere and God is everywhere. Hence, love all. The more you love others, the more your reputation will go up in society. If you commit a mistake or indulge in an evil deed, others will try to imitate you. Hence, be good, do good, and see good. This is the way to God. And these are all quotes from Bhagwan himself. Only when you conduct yourself in such a manner will you earn a good name in society. Plunge into service with a feeling. Service is God, service is my life. Service should not be undertaken with an expectation of remuneration. Money comes and goes, but morality comes and grows. This is a very oft repeated quote of Bhagwan. Money comes and goes, morality comes and grows. Do not be elated when you get money or depressed when you lose money. The difference between money and morality is, once again, Swami says, money comes and goes, whereas morality comes and grows. So, this should be the motto that we carry with us all the time. Whether we are doing any seva activity, whether we are doing our office routine transactional work, keep this motto alive. And Bhagwan will be with us at all times. With these few words, I pray to Bhagwan once again to bless us, to continue to inspire us and guide us in this journey of the Chartered Accountant Study Circle, and let this go in eternity. As Bhagwan says, all his projects will go into eternity, and let's pray that we also get into eternity. Thank you. Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for beautifully articulating the purpose of this study circle and also reminding us about the messages that Bhagwan had given in 2009. For some of you who might not have known about this particular conference which happened in Prasanthi Nilayam in 2009, all the CEOs and chairmen of 90% of the financial institutions were there in Prasanthi Nilayam. It was one of the few occasions where next to Swami there are like 20 chairs on either side. There's so many, all the CEOs and chairmen of various financial institutions were gathered, and these messages which you aptly quoted, sir, were something Swami had told all of them to put into practice. Thank you very much for bringing that to light today. Okay. Our next speaker today is Shri V. Nandakumar, IRS, Additional Commissioner of Income Tax. I think this is a CA community, so most of us would know about V. Nandakumar, sir. But just a few words about him. He's a very prominent speaker. He does a lot of motivational talks. He guides a lot of people who are aspirants of the civil services and the IRS. In fact, his own life is a significant role model, I would say. The way he had conquered some of the failures that he had in his early childhood to become today what he is, that's an inspiration to a lot of us. Sir, if you permit me, I'll have to say this. He was a school dropout in the 6th standard, right? And he had a tough time clearing his 8th and 10th standard. after he cleared his 10th standard, he couldn't get an admission in a college because they were not admitting people who had cleared it through private coaching. With all these challenges, today he's a chief guest, today he's an IRS. He is an inspiration to many people who are aspiring civil servants. Thank you very much, sir, for being here, sir. We would like to hear a few words from you, sir.
Okay, if you're tired. The karma of inception. See, because when we inaugurate something, it has its own karma. And that's why I say a specific karma and a collective karma for everything. See, when we see something as an evolution, evolution we call it as a stem cell when it originates. Because when something originates, it's always starts with zero or in its plain form. And when these stem cells are already programmed, because there is a karma for each and every cell, that is why it is evolving. நம்ம தலையிலே வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா ஒரு முடி கருப்பா இருக்கு ஒரு முடி வெள்ளையா இருக்குன்னா அந்த இண்டிவிஜுவல் முடியோட கர்மா that it has to be black and white. I'm just telling you. சரியா? So that's a specific karma actually. So each and every cell, you see some people ail in cancer of a particular organ. The rest others will remain. That is why every cell has its own karma. So that's called a specific karma of inception and how it evolves and how it's programmed. But collective, there is a collective karma again. So it is all. See what we look at. It's again the karma of the eye. Somebody we sit here, we don't look at it or we don't listen to it because நம்மளோட brainோட karma வந்து இந்த ear எல்லாம் யூஸ் பண்ணி வேற எங்கயோ travel பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம். We may be sitting here physically, but our brain and the ears may be taking to some other world or some other beyond this hall and make you reach beyond. So that is why every cell has its own karma and collectively, all put together, it comes out as a form of an action or a behavior, as an attitude. See, we are sitting as a collective karma put together. We are good or bad in our profession, personal, and in all our day to day. So, in the day karma, it is already predetermined in my karma today that I have to Coimbatore poita. I have to supposed to come here because I was rushing. Our sonarlia as being a sixth school dropout, that is again my karma that God determined. Because if He would have allowed me to continue in the regular school, I know what would have happened in this routine education system. Definitely, they would have branded because I'm dyslexic basically. எனக்கு learning disability இருக்கிறதுனால slow learner. So I can't continue in this regular education system. Definitely, they would have teased me or rather cornered me and made me feel very low. So that is the system as such. When someone doesn't excel, we always make them feel low. And that is why God decided, this guy, we should not keep it in this regular system. Let me throw out and make him. That is why the inception, the karma of inception, when the stem cell grows and it evolves, certain cell has its saturation. Like your heart, your internal organ, it all saturates. But the external talamudi, nagam, it is all evolving. Cut pandra. It is sliced and cut and it's growing. That's why we are all civilized. Cut panama we are uncivilized. So we look civilized because we are organizing those external cells as karma. The same way, I feel that every inception has its own development dynamics. எல்லாத்துக்குமே அதுக்கு ஒரு development dynamics இருக்கு. And these development dynamics, when we understand, and that is how, as collective karma, we reach so many people. If I would have been school dropped out and been confined to my own area, probably because after school dropout, I was on the roadside. There is no other way. I have to be on the roadside because படிச்சாலும் வேலை படிக்கலனாலும் வேலை ஏதாவது ஒரு வேலை இருக்கு. That is how we destined. So I was a child labor on the roadside, working in a mechanic shed, lottery ticket, the sound service, அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு different trade or different activity. So that was karma. But God, though He didn't made me formally to educate and to read and study, but He made me at least to learn the life. So that is why I learned my life, that to excel even in arts. And that made me that to do my development dynamics, that I don't want to confine. God, He don't want to confine me for a limited society and to limited people. So He wants to give some dynamism for my whatever the karma and the dyslexia vache or koreya vache. He wants some kind of deficiency. Then only, because if it is full, karma when anything is full, it saturates and you will feel moksha. Okay, when something you feel okay, appa vairu full ஆயிருச்சுனா அப்பாடா அதுக்கு மேல ஒன்றும் we don't feel taking இல்ல காலியா இருந்தால் தான் we feel of having more. So full ஆயிருச்சுனா you feel saturated. நம்ம படிச்சிருப்போம்ல, that's again saturated gases அப்படின்னு. It doesn't react. So that is why God gives emptiness people varying capacity to personality. If the same karma given to someone, there are so many. I'm seeing so many people, even better opportunity irundu, they find that giving excuses for their karma. No, God has cursed me. God has not given me. I'm not that much. And this is again, I'm finding everywhere there are the constraints again. So that is why I tell people, in the inception, everything is in the uniform state. As zero, I said, as a stem cell. But when it evolves, it is evolving in a different dynamics again, altogether with a different combination dynamics again. That is why I say, in the development dynamics, anything which is originating, because this institution has the karma of inception, it is going to not only, we have some age to complete. After that, the study circle is going to continue. And to give, as they stated, IA study circle, 20 வருஷமா, it is serving people. அப்படின்றப்ப the institution is permanent. The human being is not permanent. Something which is created is permanent. And people are getting inside. And this collective karma gives them a different outcome. It's not a specific karma. It gives a different outcome. That is why I tell people, we have to maximize in this development dynamics. If we do that, what I did in my life, I only explored my weakness, and God has made me to feel that if I by heart something, I can't reproduce. So He made me to understand and to have my own words. So I have to be, if at all I can't by heart and reproduce anything, so He made me to understand, then have my own words, that He made me to search and look for what I'm studying about it. And that is why I took this opportunity to compete not with the fools again. With this education, the same education system which rejected me, I just want to take an opportunity to challenge the same education system. If someone is studious, very tough to excel. If someone is again making the development dynamics in a greater way, he can excel even the intellectuals also. This fool, I basically declare myself a fool because that is how I've been. So this fool is able to excel and become an all India topper, like competing with IITians. When I cleared and stood before the President Prime Minister, I was telling the President Prime Minister, it's not with the pride. Even Dr. Abdul Kalam sir stated that it's not a success, it's not an achievement, it's miracle. I said nothing. I don't feel it's a miracle. I felt it's my karma. If I would have not performed, that is where what our next speaker is going to talk about ethics. Okay. So that's again, so I want my personal ethics again, that if I would have sat ideal, that my inception is something zero, I would have not developed. So I don't mind putting zeros. I was adding zeros again because inception always has zeros. I was adding all my failures, zeros again. One success gave me, before all these 1, and it made me a billionaire, and that's how I succeeded. And this is how this inception, the karma of inception, gives you an opportunity for plenty of people, whether we are here or not. And that karma definitely have its own development dynamics. I wish that it has its own super dynamics to excel, make each and everyone greater opportunity. And thank you for the opportunity given by Sri Sathya Sai Chartered Accountants Financial Professional Study Circle. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much, Sri Nandakumar sir, to talking about karma inception. In fact, I believe the study circle has started in the right note because some of the points that you mentioned are very valid, and these are messages of Bhagwan as well, where, you know, how you have treated each failure of yours as something which God is giving you as a lesson. I think that's a message that we all take. Thank you so much for being here and speaking to us. Next, we have Dr. Shashank Shah as our keynote speaker, who will speak on ethics and the world of business. A quick introduction. To be very honest, it's very difficult to do a quick introduction about Dr. Shashank Shah. The accomplishments starts right from his school days and it continues even today. So he completed his BCom in Bombay and then joined Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning in 2002. He did his MBA. He was a gold medalist in MBA. He did the Master of Philosophy. He was a gold medalist in that. And then he completed his PhD. His thesis was Corporate Stakeholders Management, a study of contemporary practices for stakeholder welfare and development of an implementation framework. And then he continued to do post-doctoral research at the university. And then he had this call to go and continue that research at Harvard Business School. He is editor-in-chief, Postdoctoral Editors Association. He is currently the consulting editor at Business India Group. Most recently, of course, he has written multiple research papers and books. His most recent book is about the Tata Group. The book is called The Tata Group, From Torchbearers to Trailblazers, where he has documented the 15-decade history of the Tata Group, which I believe not many people who are working in the Tata Group in the senior level also are not aware. You know, some of the anecdotes I hear, which he has quoted in his book, is new to a lot of people who are Tata Group veterans as well. I think both the Tata Group and us are very grateful that he was able to, you know, research and pull out all the history about the Tata Group and present to us. I think more than all the accomplishments that he has had in his professional life, the one reason we believe he will be the best person to today talk to us is almost the 12 years that he spent in Prashanthi Nilayam. Almost, I think, 8 to 9 years in close proximity with Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Traveling with him, not only in Prashanthi Nilayam, whenever Swami has traveled to Kodaikanal or Chennai or whichever place it is, he's been with Swami, had listened directly from Swami about, how these ethics are important, how the values are important. So it's only appropriate that we commence this Sri Sathya Sai Study Circle for Chartered Accountants, Finance Professionals with a keynote address by Dr. Shashank Shah. Dr. Shashank Shah.
Om Shri Sai Ram, offering our loving pranams at the Divine Lotus feet. It's an honor to be the keynote speaker at this inaugural session of the Study Circle for Chartered Accountants and Finance Professionals in the city of Chennai. I have very fond memories with this city. I was first blessed to come here in 2007 with Swami himself during the Atirudra Mahayagna. And ever since, I have always been looking forward to coming to Chennai because I feel this is the culture capital of India. This is one city where even today, in every street, you will find the temple bells ringing in the mornings and evenings, which remind you of the millennia-old heritage that India has inherited over several generations. So, thank you for having me over and for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts today. I'll be combining my own journey in the field of business, research, management, and my writings. And obviously the undercurrent of that would be all that I have learned in the broader SAI ecosystem. But because this is the inaugural session, usually whenever you inaugurate something, it is customary to provide an overview to the field that you're going to be studying going forward. So the field of business in India and the field of management in India definitely needs an overview. This is relevant both to those who've been contributors to this evolutionary story. It's also relevant to millennials like me who have entered this system much later, but are beneficiaries of the contributions that those who've been there in the formative years. So let me begin my journey, and I'll be coming back again and again to what ethics in the world of business stands for, can stand for, should stand for, and desirably will stand for going forward. So let me go back to the year 2000, the year when the millennium changed. The first alphabet, the first numeral in the year changed after 1000 years. Finally, we wrote 2000. And that opportunity comes to very few generations because you have to wait 1000 years for the number to change. So the number changed, and so did a lot of things for India. For all of you who belong to the previous era, you remember how you had to wait for 2 hours for a trunk call to be fulfilled by the telephone system. And you sit near the phone after you have booked a call. And if you want a lightning call, the earliest it will come would be about 10 or 15 minutes. And a normal call would typically take 2 or 3 hours. So the telephone system was moving from the phone call to the cell phone. Postcards, how many remember postcards? Today they have become extinct. The modern generation can't even imagine what it is to write all your communication message in that small 4 by 6 inch size. We are so used to either writing cryptic messages using the shorthand on iPhones or elaborate messages on your emails. But that was an art which is lost. But the postcards were giving way to the emails. Your Limcas and thumbs ups and gold spots were giving way to the Pepsis and Coca-Colas. The Fiats and Ambassadors were the only cars we saw on the roads for long decades. In fact, you had to wait for 10 years to get an Ambassador car. And even with premium, you won't get the car faster than 2 years. That was giving way to the Fiats. The Fiats and Ambassadors were giving way to the Toyotas and the Hondas. There was a very palpable change. The life had changed. The DD and DD Metro was a story of the past. I still remember there was a time when I was in primary school. We had TV only between 7 and 9. From 6 to 7, half an hour was meant to be information for the agricultural class in Marathi language, since I hail from Bombay. And the second half of that was lost and found stories. In Marathi, they used to say, Apan yanna pahilat ka. Did you see this person? And then they'll put a black and white photo and describe him. That was the kind of use mainstream channels like Doordarshan were used for. 7 to 9 was the only time when we had access to TV. In that, only Thursdays and Sundays you had Chaya Geet or Chitrahar, which is songs from the films, right? And only on Sunday in the afternoon you have that long awaited movie But that movie couldn't be a mainstream movie. By and large, it was an art film which showed the problems of the socialistic society, the empowerment of the poor, or the problems faced by India over several decades. That was the kind of era which most of us have grown up with, especially the elders. And from there, we came into an era after the Gulf War where we had 24/7 cable channels. And entertainment was bombarded right into your face. Philip's Top 10 became the point of conversation in schools during the break. Which was the song which was number one last week? Is it the same this week as well? You see how the changing economics of society changes the way of life each one of us leads. And that changes the priorities and preferences that each one of us have, and how our goals and aspirations change. Just then I had entered college, and a student of commerce and economics. Accounts I used to score well, but to confide, I wasn't very fond of mathematics. So numbers always scared me, because you cannot play with numbers. Though a lot of people try to do that. You can play with words. And that's what always made me feel comfortable, because there are several ways to communicate your thoughts in words. But there is only one way to communicate your message through numbers. And that's something I wasn't comfortable with. But somehow I managed through that. But what fascinated me was to study the evolution of the economic system in India. We had two streams of thoughts. The stream that was propounded by Mahatma Gandhi, which was the Sarvodaya system. The well-being of the last man in the line and the empowerment of the rural ecosystem and the economic system was his vision. Until the tear from the last man on the street in the last line is wiped away, our job is not done. On the other hand was the Nehruvian socialism, which was inspired by Russia, and the entire objective was to have state control of the economic development. You have the government being the Mai-Bap or the guardian angel of the Indian economy, and everything that is done in the economy will be decided by the government. Public sector would be center stage, and the whole objective of this society was to focus on empowering the masses with jobs and equality. But this took violent turns, because what was meant to be empowering the society started terrorizing the society. Nationalization of banks, the license Raj, which made even 1 or 2% of control of economic system as monopoly, and hence nobody could even aspire to expand their business without the government's permission. And the brother gave an example of what I have studied with the Tata Group. You would be surprised to know that it took 50 years for Tata Steel to get expansion permission from the government of India. From 100,000 tons, 1 lakh tons to 5 lakh tons. It took them 50 years to get their permission. In the same time period, Japan, which was a victim of World War II, grew 100 times. So you see, the inherent capacity of the nation was affected severely. But what was the biggest challenge to what we are discussing today, ethics, was the tax system. Between 61 and 71, the Indian tax system increased from 70% taxation to 97.5% taxation. For those belonging to this era who are used to all the conversations that happen on social media about the pros and cons of GST and demonetization, should know about the tax terrorism that India had faced for almost 2 decades, where in early 70s, we had 97.5% as the highest tax slab. And I am privileged to belong to a family, and I verified this with him. Mr. P.N. Shah, who was a former president of the ICAI, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, is my grand uncle. So I checked with him and he said, yes, that's right. And when you add wealth tax to that, the taxation went up to 105%. So for every 100 rupees you earn, you have to pay 105 rupees to the government. And then the government expects us to be ethical in doing business. So I work hard, earn 100 rupees, and then I give that 100 to the government and take 5 rupees more from my savings of some other kind and give it to the government and say I'm an honest tax citizen. In the Mahabharata, when Vidura was giving advice to Yudhishthira, he had said this, very, very distinctly that the tax system that a king imposes shouldn't be such that it forces the citizenry to become prey to falsehood. So the tax system in India was primarily responsible for the commencement of what is today celebratedly called the black economy. Obviously, black economy would be coming into mainstream because who is going to pay 105 rupees tax when you are earning 100? You need to be highly spiritually evolved to feel that I am responsible for the country's growth and hence I will sacrifice all my earnings plus add 5 rupees from my savings to be a legal tax-paying citizen. I am not promoting tax evasion on a study circle meant to be talking about ethics, but I am looking at a common man's psyche as to why ethics was a word most laughed at in that scenario. And that's why I want to provide a historical perspective to this. In the 45th year of independence, finally, bankruptcy forced the government of India to realize that this way of economic development is not going to work. The Soviet Union, from which India was inspired, itself collapsed. There was no USSR, and so there was nothing we were looking up to as our model of growth and development. And we got what was called economic liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Till then, we were growing by what was called Hindu rate of growth. Professor Rajakrishna from Europe awarded us this title, which was celebratedly discussed in economics classes, and I was also taught about the Hindu rate of growth. I mouthed it with all innocence, thinking that it is some kind of pride because it is called Hindu rate of growth. Then I realized in later years as I matured that this is not pride but derision, that Hindus cannot grow at more than 3% a year. And their conjecture was that India, China, Japan and other East Asian countries that are followers of Hinduism and Buddhism and believe in the concepts of karma and rebirth are never going to have the capacity to take risk and be enterprising. So they are only entitled to grow at 3% per year. And the copyright of growth is with the Western model of capitalism. In the year 2002, and I urge you to go and see this particular document which is available online, the OECD study, which is a commission of the Commonwealth nations. They did a study, and India has nothing to do with that study. They did a study which evaluated the performance of global economies between 1 AD and 2000 AD. All the countries of the world and how they were performing economically. The findings were astounding. Because between the year 1 AD and the year 1750 AD, there was one country which consistently contributed 35% of global economy. Which was that country? India. Correct. The elders, especially the gents at the back, were not confident about the answer, but auntie here knew it has to be India. That which is available in India is not available anywhere. Swami always used to say, Yanna Bharate, Tanna Bharata. That which is available in India, that which is Indian, you cannot find it anywhere else. Between 1750 and 1850, India contributed 25% of the global growth. And between 1850 and 1950, Britain's contribution increased from 5% to 25%, and India's contribution reduced from 25% to 5%. So all those people who constantly say, oh, the British came and gave us science and technology, the British gave us railways, the British gave us infrastructure. The British also kept quiet when 50 lakh people died in famines in South India, and 1/3 of the population of Bengal was dying out of famines. And there the big bosses of Britain said, if the famine is so serious, why is Mahatma Gandhi still alive? We are not going to let go the granaries which have been kept aside for the British troops during World War II to feed the poor who are suffering out of the famine that has struck India. That is the kind of torture we have seen under our invaders. India was never supposed to be growing at 3%. And this is not a nationalistic pitch about India. This is a factual, historical pitch about the India story. And the same OECD study has predicted, and we see that happening. And I'm proud to say that 25 years earlier, this is a book called Man Management. And I urge all the participants of this study circle to have a copy of this book. It's available at Sundaram. This is a compilation of 40 discourses given by Swami to the students of the MBA program at the Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning, where every aspect of business and its management is captured. Marketing, finance, rural development, leadership, economic development, psychology, sociology, organizational behavior, total quality management, re-engineering. There is no aspect of business which is not covered by Swami in his discourses, giving examples of contemporary India. In those years, Swami had mentioned, India will lead the world in the 21st century. 25 years earlier, people would consider it to be a fantasy. My father, in all my innocence, I always used to say, Sanatan Sarthi, oh, Swami has said this. I used to read Swami's books and then say, Daddy, this is what Swami has said. My father said, Swami's job is to inspire all of us, so he will tell all this. But the current economic, corporate and economic situation of this country shows no slightest, remotest possibility of India ever achieving any success even close to what Swami is saying. Forget being number one. Today, we are the third largest economy in the world by purchasing power parity. And the latest Standard Chartered report says that by 2030, India will be the second largest global economy in terms of purchasing power parity, beating the United States of America. America will be a $31 trillion economy, India will be a $45 trillion economy, and China will be a $64 trillion economy in just 11 years. From 2030 onwards, there is only going to be one competitor for India, which is our dear neighbor, China. And that's when the power of our cultural roots, our spiritual values, and our civilizational heritage, and our vibrant democracy and transparent media is going to play a very important role in giving the strength to India to enable it to go for a sustainable success thereafter. So this whole story of India leading the world into the 21st century is panning out right in front of our eyes. When I completed my work at Harvard Business School recently, I spoke to some of my professors about opportunities in India and US. You do that every time you. Their observation was, I don't know why anybody from India should want to work in any other country in the current scenario. This is a professor from Harvard. American economy is stagnating. America is on a downward trend. India is the place to be because India is where China was 25 years earlier. If there is any promising story in the world today, it is the India story. So that's the kind of change we have seen in front of our eyes. But I will take you through the complexities which led to the achievement of this change and the ethics of it. Around that time, we saw new age banks coming up. HDFC, ICICI were replacing State Bank of India and Bank of Baroda or the Indian Bank and other equivalents in this part of the country as being very popular. We had drawing room discussions no longer about joining Amalgamations Group or the Sundaram Group, but about joining Wipro and Infosys because they are the bellwethers of the new decade. Right? Because IT is where the future is, and these were the poster boys of the Indian IT story. Of course, TCS was the pioneer, but TCS wasn't a brand builder, so Infosys and Wipro were more popular from a brand perspective. Then TCS realized that in India you have to talk about what you have done. Only then you are recognized as being a pioneer, and I have captured that in my book. And I still remember when I was in college, Bombay Stock Exchange crossed 5,000 points. And people went on top of the Bombay Stock Exchange and released 5,000 balloons to commemorate the 5,000 mark. In the last 20 odd years, we have grown 7 times. We are now at 35,000 points. The other story was about the IT boom in the Silicon Valley. People wanted to go there. There's a study which shows that from around 1950 to 1985, 25,000 graduates of IIT had settled down in the Silicon Valley. The entire subsidized taxpayers' money for IIT education was contributing to the success of the Silicon Valley, and India continued to grow at the Hindu rate of growth. And this IT boom and all the success stories of these huge companies all of a sudden became what was eventually called the IT bubble. The bubble burst, and the market cap of these countries, which was a few $1 trillion, came down to pennies. There was another company which was extremely popular at that time. It was called Enron. At its peak, its annual revenue was $111 billion, and its stock price was $90 per share. In Dabhol in Maharashtra, they had their plant which was in collaboration with the government of India. And what we saw in the next 18 months is that from $90, the stock price came down to a few pennies. Why? Because the regulatory agencies realized for the first time that they were what is now popularly known as called window dressing or fudging their accounts. When for a long time as an innocent kid, when I used to read, I thought window dressing means dressing up your windows. And green washing means coloring your walls as green. Window dressing of such an extent that the practices or the malpractices of their CEO and CFO and the auditing firms was an encyclopedia of all the unethical things that can ever be done in the corporate world. And Arthur Andersen was also considered to be a part of the larger game, so much so that they had to change their name and become Accenture in order to be eligible to continue that practice. So that kind of made me think, what is the purpose of business? Is it only about making profits at any cost and every cost? Because we always think that the job of business is to make money for the shareholders. And whenever there are such problems, who loses out? Not the shareholders. They are either bailed by the government or the taxpayers' money or by the banks. Those who lose out are the employees. Those who lose out are the customers. Those who lose out are those who had faith in the promise of the product and service of that company and realized that the company itself no longer exists. So I ventured to study what in Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, I was doing my MBA. My topic for my MBA project was Corporate Governance, Corporate Social Responsibility Interface. Is there a connection between good governance practices and good social responsibility practices? And my findings were yes, those who had good governance practices were definitely good at their social responsibility. Then it was time for me to do PhD. Swami blessed me to do PhD. In fact, I finished my MBA and I was sitting in Prasanthi Nilayam to talk about to wait for Swami's instructions as to what I should do next. That's a tradition. That was a tradition in those days that we used to look forward to guidance to Swami as to what we should be doing. Because who other than Swami is best suited to tell us what is good for us in our lives. So I was sitting there, and the very first day Swami came there and he said, Swami used to talk in very typical Hyderabadi Hindi. Ab kya karta hai? So I said, Swami, I finished my MBA. Even without a fraction of a second, he looked at me and said, PhD karo. 6 times he said, PhD karo, PhD karo, PhD karo. It's later on hindsight, I realized it took me exactly 6 years to do my MPhil and PhD. And in 2010, I got my PhD from Swami's hands. But coming to that a little later, what should I do PhD on? I always thought, after going through all these kinds of things, that there is a role for dharma in business. So I said, Swami, I want to do PhD in dharmic management. Swami said, oh, but that is a very big topic. How will you do? I said, Swami, if I have your grace, I will do. I said, tappaga, tappaga. Definitely it is there, saying that. He patted my shoulder several times. But I still really didn't know what I should be doing as an exact topic of my PhD. Till one fine day, one of my juniors came to me and said, Shashank, have you read this paper on stakeholder theory? That word it was as if you get that, and it was like, yes, it's not an enlightenment actually, but it's an opening of a lock which was closed, and once you open that lock, an entire treasure house opens for you. That word, even without knowing what it meant in those days, said, yes, that is the word which I should do PhD on. And that's when I realized what stakeholder management was all about. In my research and studies, if there is true ethics in business that is possible, it is through the stakeholders' approach to business. And I'll come to that and then elaborate on what Swami has also said in that. But I thought that these bad practices were limited to the West. So I felt India is very good. India doesn't make mistakes. Not knowing all this history. These histories I've learnt now. In those years, I didn't know all of the things that I've just shared. And for the millennials, it will be difficult to know that there was no the Wikipedia in those years. So if you really want to find out about anything, you have to go to a library and open the Britannica or the World Book to find out any story that you want to know in whichever field of study. Today, everything is at your fingertips. So I realized, so it was a revelation to me in the course of my PhD that Enron's brother was not anywhere else. It was in our neighborhood. And the name of Enron's brother was Satyam. The company which was given the Golden Peacock Award for Corporate Governance and whose name itself was Satyam became the poster boy of Asatyam and of fudging of accounts to the tune of thousands of crores. So this came back to the fundamental question, that is short-termism the objective of business? Earning money in the short term, the QTQ, the Q2Q, quarter to quarter approach of business, is that what business is meant to be all about? There was a very nice Chinnakatha that Swami had shared. There was this boy who was crying at a temple tank. Not a temple tank, at a tank. And passing by was a thief who had looted the neighborhood and all his booty on his back. He was walking through that temple tank and he saw this small kid crying, so he went there, not temple tank, sorry, tank. I don't want to use the word temple tank. He went to this kid and asked him what happened. So he said, I had a gold chain, but I just now was taking bath here and the chain has fallen down somewhere. Can you please help me? There was a twinkle in the eyes of this seasoned thief. This kid is a fool to tell me that his chain is lying here at the base of the tank. I have this booty with me, that chain also is mine. He said, oh, is it so? Just wait here, I'll get your chain for you. He went down to the base, tried looking for the chain. When he came out, he realized that the chain was a figment of imagination. And when he looked around, he saw neither the boy nor his earnings were there at the bank of the tank. So short-termism is like that. In order to optimize that greed, that I want everything here and now, we lose what we already have and don't get what we think we'll get in the short term. So the researcher in me was quite shattered and wanted to know about how all of these things are possible. And that's when in my research I went back to see what is the source of ethics. Is ethics in business force-fitting, or is ethics in business an integral part of business? When I studied the likes of Chanakya, Aristotle and Adam Smith, I realized that over the last 2000 years, consistently, this has been the message of economists, that ethics and economics have to coalesce. Adam Smith, who is the father of modern economics, had first written a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. 15 years later, he wrote the book Wealth of Nations. Modern day capitalists and corporate leaders are in great awe of Wealth of Nations. Nobody reads the Theory of Moral Sentiments. And that's why corporations and economies have brought themselves to this situation where we need to try and see how ethics and economics, or values and business, can coexist. These are two sides of the same coin. And for sustainable growth, both of these are equally important. That's exactly the kind of focus Chanakya had given in the Arthashastra. That's exactly the focus Aristotle had given in Greece. So you see, whether it is India, whether it is the Middle East, or it is Europe, the message has been consistent, but we want to use the message only that suits our requirements. In part of my research, I went out and spoke to several experts in India and overseas. And the common message I got from most of these experts, the likes of governors and deputy governors of RBI, the likes of KV Kamath and great bankers of India, the likes of Edward Freeman and several other subject experts from overseas universities, is that profits are like a human body's life breath. Profits in business is equivalent to a life breath in a human body. It is required, it is mandatory. But to say that an organization lives to make profits is to say that human beings live to breathe. Are we living to breathe, or are we breathing to live? We are breathing to live, but we are living to achieve a purpose. So the entire objective of a corporation is to have a purpose orientation. Today, corporations have reduced themselves to a mathematical equation. The balance sheet is all corporations are about. Business is not a mathematical equation. An extremely complex human ecosystem is what forms a business. To bring that down to a mathematical equation is to ignore the interests of a very large set of stakeholders who are contributing to the success of that business. And that is the problem that corporations have been facing for several decades. If this wasn't done, we would be seeing a far more holistic and sustainable society. Fortune 500 companies wouldn't be going bust every 15-20 years. A study showed that between 1965 and 2015, if you analyze the Fortune 500 companies, only 13% of the companies which existed in 1965 are existing today. Only 13%, which means 87% of the Fortune 500 companies that existed in 1965 do not exist today. In that context, companies like the Tata Group, whose founder Jamsetji Tata said that the society is not just another stakeholder of business, but the very purpose of its existence, hold special value. Because for 80 years, there is one group of companies in my research I have studied in great elaborate way that has led success in India. And the reason for that is their model. And I'd like to elaborate on that because that shows how ethics in business and the ideal of trusteeship, which Swami espoused, which Gandhiji talked about, which the Upanishads have said, Tena taktena bunjita magrida kasyasviddanam. All that you see does not belong to you. You are a trustee. The owner is God. Your job is to use it for the well-being of others after your immediate requirements are satisfied. How do we see the Tata Trust achieve it? And I am not promoting them, but I am just sharing it as a researcher. The Tata companies are owned in varied proportions by the Tata Sons, which is the central holding company, between 20 to 70%. The Tata Sons in turn are owned by Tata Trusts to the tune of 67%. And Tata Trusts are not a corporate foundation but a public charitable trust, almost like our central trust, whose mandate is to spend 85% of their earnings for the well-being of the society. So the dividends which Tata companies earn goes to the Tata Sons to the proportion of their ownership, and 67% of Tata Sons dividends go to Tata Trusts, and 85% of that money comes back into the society. So what Jamsetji Tata envisaged 125 years ago is in perpetuity even today, that the society is not another stakeholder but the center of existence of a corporation. And in this case we are seeing that how wealth creation is a virtuous cycle. That which comes from the society goes back to the society in continuous perpetuity. Even if the Tata Trust want, they can't sell their ownership of Tata Sons because the legal mandate is to remain that way. And here is an example in ethics in business where ethics is not an add-on. Ethics is the very core of business. And that's what distinguishes some of our founding business leaders from those of the West. Dale Carnegie or some of the others in the previous century, Rockefeller and others, they were among the richest Americans ever, controlling about 2% of the American GDP individually. And then they had this Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Mellon University and all of that. But they were called robber barons. Robber barons, why? Because at the peak of their prosperity, their objective was to earn money by exploiting the system and create a monopoly so that they can thrive. After earning all that money and satisfying their requirements of being the greatest and most successful businessmen, they said, okay, now we are so great, we will give back to society. This is typically what all of us do. Make all the mistakes in life and then go to Tirupati and shave our head. And think that by shaving our head, Lord Venkateshwara is most pleased. Oh, you know, I went there and shaved my head and came. Swami had said, Venkateshwara doesn't need your dirty hair. He has his own beautiful locks. Do not think that your ill-gotten wealth can be justified by putting a few gold biscuits in the undi and making God a partner in your sin. Means are as important as the ends. That is the fundamental of ethics. Means are as important as the ends. That is the fundamental of ethics. And what are the right means of doing business? The right means of doing business is when the interests of all your stakeholders are integrated into the well-being of your the interests of all the stakeholders integrated into the corporate strategy. Today we see that happening to CSR, and I'll come to that a little later. But I'll conclude this part of an overview to the Indian business story by saying that in the last 700 years, we were under some form of colonization. In the last 70 years, we've been an independent country, of which the first 45 years I described as how we were through an experimental system of a socialist form, a centralized form. And the last 25 years alone, India has had a tremendous success story despite any government being at the center and at the state. That is the inherent resilience and entrepreneurship of this country. Tamil Nadu itself is a great success story, and I don't want to talk on the camera as to how, irrespective of any government and its policies, this set of people have done so well for themselves and the country that Tamil Nadu leads India in several ways in its industrial growth and development. So what is required in essence for success of a corporation or an economy? We need three things. We need a liberal system where corporations are given the freedom to grow. We need a transparent tax system where we are having all the resources which are earned in the right way taxed and plowed back into the ecosystem. And we have a thriving entrepreneurial mindset which continues to give us inspiration to be risk-taking and enterprising. Those who are left of center think, what role does taxation play? And how playing around with taxes does or does not help in the context of ethics. And I'll give you an example of the Tata Group here before I go to what Swami has said about value-based solutions to financial problems. The Tata Group alone contributes 2.25% of India's taxes. Can you guess how much does one group contribute to taxes? This group. A wild guess. Guess. Even Kaun Banega Crorepati gives you an opportunity to guess on your cell phones. And there is no galat jawab here. No, amount in terms of numbers. How many crores? No, that is too much. No. 1,000 crores is peanuts. Chennai TCS only will be giving more than that. 47,000 crores is one group's tax contribution to the country, which is equivalent to the entire tax collected by the state of Andhra Pradesh, just one state. That is the power of a properly taxed corporation's resources. The Ministry of Textiles budget is just 3,500 crores. So you can imagine a proper tax system and a proper tax paying ethical legal system, what kind of good it can do to the society. I'll go to what Swami has said with specific reference to values-based solutions to finance. And I have 10 minutes or 15 minutes? 15 minutes, okay. So first I'll try and differentiate between what is legal, ethical and moral. And Swami always used to give this very beautiful example of a Sanskrit verse. Satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, ma bruyat, satyam apriyam. Speak the truth, satyam bruyat. Speak it in a pleasing way, priyam bruyat. Ma bruyat, satyam apriyam. Do not speak the truth which is going to be harmful to the other person. Swami said in this, satyam bruyat is legal requirement. Priyam bruyat is ethical requirement. Ma bruyat satyam apriyam is moral requirement. This example can be extrapolated to understand what is the difference between legal, ethical and moral. We very many times think ethics and legality are synonymous. We many times confuse between ethics and morality. Through this one example, Swami has clearly distinguished between what is ethics, what is morality, and what is legality. In terms of, and because it is for chartered accountants and finance professionals, I have taken these two discourses which Swami had given in 1996. In 1986 and 1998, where Swami spoke elaborately about what are the solutions to the problems in the field of finance. I'll definitely refer to the message of Swami in the 2009 Ethics in the World of Finance conference. We all were wondering what message will Swami give to all these CEOs and chairmen of nearly 45 leading public, private and foreign banking institutions and insurance companies and several other regulatory leaders. In his valedictory discourse, Swami started speaking about Mahabharata. We all students said, oh no, Swami, again Mahabharata. What are these people going to understand about ethics and the world of finance from the story of Mahabharata? It was only the foolishness in us which was judging Swami and his wisdom in talking about Mahabharata in front of these eminent people. Swami compared the 2008 financial crisis to the game of dice that Yudhishthira played in front of the Kauravas and the king of Hastinapura, that is Dhritarashtra himself. Swami compared all other innocent stakeholders, which the four Pandavas who were sold off by Yudhishthira in order to fulfill his particular ego that I will win. And Swami compared the country to the innocent and afflicted Draupadi, who was not even asked whether her interests are at stake and was pawned in the game of dice. You see the kind of analogy and the beauty of it that Swami has given. And then Swami concluded that financial leadership of a company is like Yudhishthira. It thinks that in its game of dice, in its desire to earn money or earn wealth or power in the short term, it can pledge or it can pawn anything that is at its disposal. The well-being of all its stakeholders, the customers, the employees, the supply chain partners, the society, the environment, everybody is available for being pawned because you think that at their cost you can make money. And the country, Mother India, is like Draupadi, who is often humiliated without being asked whether she is your property or you are her property. That is the kind of message that the Mahabharata has placed before us. Do not make mistakes which have already been made. That is the scripture, that is the message of Indian scriptures. Indian scriptures never tell us that human beings are infallible. Indian scriptures tell us that do not make the mistakes that we already made. But we do not want to look at them because we think that we are better. That is relevant 5,000 years ago. How is it relevant today? Bhishma told in the Shanti Parva to Yudhishthira, I thought that by dividing my motherland, I will be able to bring peace between two warring brothers. I made a very big mistake, Yudhishthira. Never divide your motherland as a short-term solution to problems that you are facing. 5,000 years later, we have done the same thing. We thought that by dividing our country into two parts, we will solve the problem which we were facing during our freedom struggle. Today, almost 70 years later, We see what happened on the borders. We see how many lives we have lost. We see how many billions of dollars have been spent to protect our borders. If the same amount of money, if the 1.5 lakh or 2 lakh crores of defense budget was channelized into education, healthcare, infrastructure, women's empowerment and poverty alleviation of our masses, India would have been a developed country 50 years ago. But one wrong decision of partition, because we do not learn from what our scriptures have to tell us. So the job of a study circle also is to draw parallels from the wisdom of others and see what we can learn from that. Indian scriptures are the story of the fallacies and the fallibility of the human being, and that we should not reinvent the wheel. Our scriptures are not that cannot be challenged, because only our scriptures where so many stories, everybody will have his own version of Ramayana, of Bharata. People will try to justify Duryodhana also, and we will say, okay, let's see how you justify. And those books also will become bestsellers. But the fact of the matter is that fundamental principles and values, irrespective of interpretations, cannot be changed. So what were the solutions? So that was the 2009. That's a very nice discourse. You must read. In that, Swami did a SWOT analysis of Bharat and said that the problem with India is like it is an elephant who thinks that the mahout is more powerful than the elephant. When the elephant is a baby, it is tied with a rope. It is too small, so it tugs at the rope. It cannot loosen itself, so it thinks the rope is more powerful. 20 years later, it becomes a mighty elephant, and still it holds on to that feeling that even if I tug at the rope is more powerful than me. So the mahout tells it down, it will sit down. It will stand up, it will stand up. India has become an elephant, like that elephant Swami said. You are not aware of its inherent power. The moment India develops that confidence in itself and its civilizational values, India will be able to assert itself. And today we see when the Yoga Day is celebrated by almost 180 countries of the world, we know that this is a civilization that has survived 5,000 years of human history. The Roman civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Babylonian civilization, the Mayan civilization, all have been assigned to the pages of history. It is only the Indian civilization that has been a thriving civilization. And I am not saying that. The British historians have said, Arnold Toynbee, Mr. S.V. Giri, who was the Vice Chancellor of Swami's University, often used to quote, he used to say, and the job of the study circle conductor is to bring in all these different perspectives, and I am trying to present that. It's not about taking a story from Satsai Speaks and just sharing it. Going threadbare to the root of the issue and presenting different viewpoints in order to discuss as to what mistakes we made and what we should not repeat. What are the right things we did and what we should continue is the job of a Satyasai study circle. So Arnold Toynbee said that the world history which has a Western beginning will have an Indian ending. And India will conquer her conquerors in the 21st century. This he had written 50 years ago. And we see that in 2020, Indian economy is going to leave the British economy far behind. And today, India or Tatas alone are the largest employers in Britain, with Tetley, Chorus and Jaguar Land Rover owned by the Tatas. Tatas are the largest employers in Great Britain, but we have not exploited them. They thought, oh, India will take revenge. The empire will strike back and try to ruin the British economy. That is where the Indian approach is very different. Samasta lokaha sukhino bhavantu. Let Tetley, let Chorus, let Jaguar Land Rover also thrive and succeed. I'm not saying that these corporations are spiritual organizations. I'm not saying that they don't make mistakes. I'm not saying that the Tata Group is the best. I'm only providing perspectives on this topic of ethics in the world of business. So 9 points Swami said, and I'll quickly run through them with one small example. First solution, and these you will not find in the books of economics and finance, because these are fundamental solutions to financial problems. And if we go back and try to analyze why these problems exist, this is the reason. If I have time, I have also put together 4 or 5, and I'll share that. It can be emailed. Swami has defined finance. Swami has said, what is the reason for devaluation of currency? Swami has answered the question, who is responsible for financial frauds? Swami has answered the question, how should we acquire money? Swami has answered, who is really responsible in the collusion between auditors, top management and bankers? These are the kind of questions Swami has answered. So it's like showing ourselves a mirror when we look into Sai literature. But I look at these 9 solutions that Swami has given. First, Swami said, to solve financial problems, we need to have fundamental discrimination. You take a step back. What is fundamental discrimination? You separate yourself from the existing situation and look at it in a very objective way. You look at it in a very objective way and try to find out what is the fundamental root of the problem. Whether you have a stake in it or not, whether you are responsible for the problem or not, or you are going to be the beneficiary of the outcome or not. If you step back and see what was the root cause of the problem, then you will be able to understand what are possible solutions. I remember in Trai Brindavan, we were all with Swami, and Mr. Venu Srinivasan was also there, the chairman and managing director of TVS Motor Company. And we had this question of ethics and how sometimes certain problems cannot be solved with the following of ethical principles. So in that discussion in his factory, Mr. Venu Srinivasan said, yes, there are problems where we cannot be ethical. And then all of us, the innocent, naive and idealist young minds that we are in the college years, we said, how can such a great devotee of Swami say that you cannot follow ethics in business? And Mr. Srinivasan was also not very happy with his answer. So we were coming back. He came back in the car. We came back from Hosur in the bus. And we were crossing that railway station, that crossing near Brindavan. And we were all discussing this. I and one of my friends were discussing that how can sir say that you cannot have ethical solutions to problems? Not knowing that Mr. Venu Srinivasan is back walking behind us. So he came and he tapped my back and he said, yes, that is the question I am going to ask Swami. Swami, I have not been able to answer this question your boys have raised before me, that how can we have ethical solutions to all the problems? We all went. Swami gave a Trai session. We were all sitting there in Swami's presence. And then Venu Srinivasan sir said, Swami, I have a question. This is the kind of conversation we had. The TVS Motor Company hosts our MBA students for factory visits. So this was a part of that interaction. And after the factory visit, Swami used to take stock. What happened in the factory? What did you see? What did you learn? Etc. That was the kind of involvement Swami had. Because yoga karmasu kaushalam. Anybody who says that spirituality is about retiring to the forests or spirituality is an old age profession has not understood the word spirituality. The root word in spirituality is spirit. Following the spirit or essence of every activity is being spiritual. And the essence of work and is to do it well, and that is true spirituality. So there in that conversation, he said, Swami, these are the questions the boys asked. How do we answer this? How do we handle this? Swami said, yes. If you have such a situation, what you should do? You should use, Swami said, deep discrimination. The synonym of which is fundamental discrimination. When you look at a situation, 2 equally bad outcomes, when analyzed in greater depth, you will realize that one among the 2 is less bad. In such a difficult situation, when you have to use between 2 bads, use deep discrimination to find out which is the lesser bad of the 2 and choose that. That is being ethical in such situations. That is the kind of practical solution Swami has given. But we have to use our fundamental discrimination in order to differentiate between the 2 and find out what is lesser of. Second solution, Swami said, values-based solution to financial problems is service to society. Now, how can service to society be a solution to financial problems? That is, we already discussed that about the Tata Group, that how society is the core stakeholder. But historically, in India, the Mahajans or the owners of the guilds were responsible for the well-being of the community in which they were doing their trade and commerce. Muslim Mahajans used to contribute to the well-being of Hindu temples and Jain temples, and Jain and Hindu Mahajans used to look at the well-being of Muslim mosques. Whoever is in that community, the responsibility of the financial support is the Mahajans. If there is a famine, they will give money. If there is a marriage of a poor family, daughter of a poor family, they will give it. The society was a self-sufficient ecosystem. After that came the independence movement, when all these great philanthropists opened their coffers and supported Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress party in order to work towards India's liberation, India's political liberation. Then we came to the period when I said there was no money for yourself, forget doing charity. So we thought that it is the government's responsibility to take care of everything. With the liberalization setting in, there was a time when people started making superlative profits, and then on their own they realized that it is not enough to make money for ourselves. We should be doing something which is for the well-being of society. Today in 2013, the government passed the mandatory CSR law, where 2% of your profits after tax should be used for the well-being of the society. Not only that, a board level committee should be overlooking the performance of this on a quarterly basis. Now we'll say 15,000 crores annual contribution by the companies. How is it going to be solving the problems of India? 15,000 crores will not solve the problems of India. But when 15,000 corporate leaders spend 15 minutes of their time every quarter in order to see what I can do for the well-being of the society in my neighborhood, health, education, women's empowerment, rural development, slum development, sports development, social inclusion, then the best of the brains are working towards solving social problems. When social problems are resolved, financial problems will automatically find their genuine solutions. And in that time, in that discourse, Swami said, Swami gave a discourse on statistics, and I'm amazed. I came across this only today. There was a Harvard paper on impact measurement by Professor Kasturi Rangan, who was my mentor, and one more professor, which talks about the need to measure impact of the social work that you have done. What is the output? Today, social work or corporate social responsibility is measured in terms of investments. How much money we are spending. They said that is a bad way of analyzing. You have to see output. After that, you have to see outcome. Finally, you have to see impact. 30 years earlier, in his discourse, Swami has said, and I quote, statistics must be applied not only to important areas of capital and income, but also to calculate the contribution made in serving the society. Unfortunately, man today is very busy in increasing his profits to meet his selfish interests and selfish ends. He wastes precious natural resources and may be called a waste maker. 30 years earlier, Swami is talking about impact measurement to see how social investments can be used for the well-being of society. Third point, and this brother Chandrasekharan covered, love for God and fear of sin. We are emulating the West and becoming an increasingly atheistic society. We are forgetting that America's motto itself is "In God we trust." That is the American motto, the equivalent of Satyameva Jayate. It is unfortunate that today the word God itself is being questioned in leading institutions, because we have confined God to churches, mosques and temples. We have forgotten the pristine message of India that God does not reside in any of these places. We are all living gods. That is the message of Swami. And that's why I mentioned this in the morning also when I addressed the Sai youth. Swami never used to call us ladies and gentlemen. Have you heard any discourse, those who have been devotees, and Swami said ladies and gentlemen? No. Swami Vivekananda in that Chicago Parliament of Religion said, brothers and sisters of America, and he got a standing ovation for 5 minutes, because that concept that all are my brothers and sisters never existed. Swami has gone to the next level and said, embodiments of the divine Atma. The first relates to the body, ladies and gentlemen, our gender. The second relates to the mind, our relationship, brothers and sisters. But the Sai message relates to the Atma, that we are all embodiments of divinity. So fear of God, love for God and fear of sin and morality in society. This is the triune principle on which a sustainable society can be built. This was the triune system on which Indian civilization has survived for thousands of years. Because you have love for God, you have fear of sin. I love God, I love His message, then how can I do wrong? If I do wrong, I am cheating the person who I love. So love for God inspires the fear of sin. And when these two principles are managed effectively, Swami said, there is morality in society. So this is the third solution Swami is given for long-term solutions to financial problems. The fourth solution is education based, I'll run quickly, education based on Indian culture and ethos. Swami had said, when he started his educational institutions, that the system of education established by Macaulay has continued to focus and connect education with employment. Education is not for employment. Education is for enlightenment. Unfortunately, Swami said, education has become responsible for agitation. The primary objective of education is elevation. One word, but such a extraordinary vision for what education should be doing. And I take great pride in saying that the Sri Sathya Sai educational institutions have set an example of how values can be integrated into higher learning. In 1982, when Nani Palkiwala came as the chief guest of Swami's University, he said, this is an experiment in showing whether values can be integrated into the system of higher education. Today, values can't be integrated in school because kids don't want to listen to their parents. Why is the question they ask. Nobody wants to say, yes, I will do. At the university level, it was attempted in 82. It was an experiment. 20 years later, when Dr. Abdul Kalam came as the chief guest, as the President of India, he said, if someone asks me, can ethics be incorporated in higher education? I will say yes. The Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning is an outstanding example and a model for replication. So what was an experiment in 20 years became a model for benchmarking and execution. I recently met the HRD minister in Delhi, and I spoke to him about our model of education, and he said, please send me a copy. I have co-authored a book on the Sathya Sai system of integral education and how it has been implemented. Because today people are talking about a Vedic education board and Indian ethos and values in education. For 35 years, this has been implemented in action, and 20,000 alumni are working in the society today by excelling in their professions, but also following ethics in whatever they do. Fifth point, drawing power from the self. This comes from the definition of manager itself. The definition of manager, and that's a study circle which we may want to do. Swami said M-A-N-A-G-E-R. I will just expand on that. M, Swami said, stands for mind of man. A stands for awareness of the Atma. N stands for nature of nations. A stands for aspects of environment. G stands for guidelines for goodness. E stands for inquiry into ethos. And R stands for the role of rules. If every manager sticks to these 7 principles, like the 7 swaras, the 7 colors of the rainbow, Swami said, you will not be an excellent manager, you will become a universal manager, because everything that is there to do with ethics and values in business is encapsulated in these 7 principles. If you see, I have tried to cover each of them through the course of my talk, through examples from the real world. Fifth point is ethical business communication. I'll just mention one sentence here, and I quote Swami. Swami says, communication between a business organization and the financial institutions should be clear. The IL and FS situation is a glaring example of how, when this is not done, financial problems not only compound, they exponentially increase. Sixth point, socially responsible products. If we see, it is the irresponsible products that are available in society that cause more financial problems. A Tata Trust and the government of India has to spend thousands of crores to set up a cancer grid which consists of 100 super specialty hospitals across the country to solve the problems of cancer 80% of which come from cigarette and tobacco chewing. If the society, in fact, you would be amazed to know, and you must see this, during the formation of our constitution, there was this discussion, and you should go back to that. There was a discussion whether India as a country should be a legally mandated dry state. Alcohol should not be sold in India. That was supposed to be a part of the constitution. Then what did the members of the parliament say? Even need to mention that in the constitution in a country that is inspired by the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. The founding fathers of India and the constitution were so confident that India will never need to talk about prohibition because we are all the spiritual offsprings of the principle of Mahatma Gandhi. Today, TASMAC gives 40,000 crores of revenue to the state of Tamil Nadu. And I don't want to get into the details of how it is utilized. When socially responsible products are made available to the society, financial problems are resolved in a far more easier way. Next is values-based leadership. And Swami has to, and just to elaborate that, Swami said, people say that cigarette and alcohol and other things are made available because there is a demand for it. Swami said, I do not agree with that. Because they are available, there is a demand for it. Because cable TV is available, there is a demand for it. Because social media is available, there is demand for it. We were all alive and thriving and enjoying and entertaining ourselves even when there was only DD Metro. Even when there was no email. Even when we did not have access to McDonald's, India was also a happy country at that time. That's why J.R.D. Tata had said when he got the Bharat Ratna that some economist has predicted that India will become the superpower in the next century. He said, I do not want India to be a superpower. I want India to remain a happy country. See, that is what is important. Happiness comes from a sense of acceptance of what is available and not going into the wrong ways to see that, oh, if this is also available, people will be more happy. So this logic of providing cigarettes and alcohol is quite a skewed logic. Values-based leadership is the 7th point. Swami always used to talk about the role of values in leadership. Yatha Raja Tatha Praja. That's why the example of Rama, Yudhishthira, Harishchandra is placed before us again and again. Because leader has 3 roles. Ethics in business. 1, to give a vision. 2nd, to provide an enabling ecosystem so that that vision can be achieved. And 3rd and most important, walk the talk. You have to practice what you are saying. That's why Swami's Mahavakya leadership is, Mary Parker's Follett definition is, management is the art of getting things done through others. Correct? That's what we learn in college. Swami's Mahavakya of leadership is to be, to do, to see, and to tell. First you be yourself. Then you do what you are saying. Then you see whether what you are being and doing is actually achieving its objectives. Then you can tell. Values-based leadership starts with practice of that at our own level. There's a very nice book and I would encourage you to read that by Professor Rakesh Khurana from Harvard, From Higher Aims to Hired Hands. He traces the devolution of the management education system in the world, which started with the Harvard Business School almost a century ago, where the whole objective of management education, business education, was to work towards higher aims. Harvard and other institutions started management education so that the management graduates can contribute to the work of the church for the well-being of society. From those higher aims, business education today has become a game of hired hands. And as one corporate leader compared, the campus placements at IIM Ahmedabad are like the cattle fair in Pushkar. The campus placements at IIM Ahmedabad is like the cattle fair in Pushkar. In Pushkar, all the cattle are displayed. Who wants to buy this cattle so that it can use it for transportation or consumption? That's exactly what's happening in management schools today. Are we working towards creating individuals who are contributing to higher aims, or are we only manufacturing hired hands? The last point Swami gave is faith in the divine. Faith in the divine is what Swami always used to call self-confidence. Self-confidence, confidence in the self. The divinity that is existent in each one of us is the true self. Confidence in that self, that we are not this body, but the instruments that are being provided to the divinity within, is what self-confidence is all about. The second stage, Swami said, is self-satisfaction. Am I doing everything to satisfy this self or the divinity within us in order to ensure that we are living by our conscience? Third, self-sacrifice. Here the S becomes small, not the capital S, but the small s. The individual identity that we have with ourself. Sacrifice that. Give up doership. Karma yoga as it is called. Do your best, but give the results, leave the results to God. That does not mean that you don't do your best, but that means that you relieve yourself of all the tension and paranoia that surrounds you for getting the results to your expectations. This entire result orientation approach which is thrust on us today is not the philosophy of Bharat. The philosophy of Bharat in an ethical system is action orientation. And the last point, Swami says, if you follow this self-confidence, if you follow self-satisfaction, if you give up the sense of doership, you get what is often called as self-realization. You realize that there is one power which is working through everybody. And if we are in tune with that power and the higher objectives of that power, which Swami has described in one word, samasta lokaha sukhino bhavantu, then we ourselves will automatically be contributing and working towards that higher objective. Whether we are chartered accountants, whether we are teachers, whether we are lawyers, whether we are businessmen, or whether we are homemakers. Our objectives and priorities will be aligned to that. So ethics in business, in essence, comes to this fundamental principle, samasta lokaha sukhino bhavantu. Can I do my business in such a way that all the people associated with the business, their interests are taken care of? The customers, the employees, the supply chain, the society, the environment, the government, and the shareholders. And in my research and the books that I have written and the companies that I have studied have shown that it is possible and you can do well by doing good. Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you, Dr. Shashank Shah, for bringing forth the various messages of Swami around ethics and the world of business. There are quite a few that I have noted down, but for want of time, I would not go into summarizing them. I'm sure I won't do a great job of summarizing it either way. Quickly, we would like to thank Sri Nandakumar, who was there with us for the inauguration, for coming today and inaugurating this session. Thank you, Dr. Shashank Shah, for agreeing to be the keynote speaker, and quite a thought-provoking conversation that we had. We also thank Sri Murali, Managing Director of Sri Krishna Sweets, for partnering with us in this endeavor. Our thanks to Sri Ramaswamy, Director, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Chennai Kendra, though he couldn't make it today to be amongst us, but he had been kind enough to agree to give this place to us. Our thanks to Sri S.R. Chandrasekharan sir for taking the time to come and give the inaugural address. Our thanks to Sri Ramesh Sharma and also Sarveshwaran sir for putting this together. Thanks to the CA community for being here, taking time out on a Sunday to be part of this interesting conversation. It is our endeavor to continue this study circle, Sri Satya Sai Study Circle for Chartered Accountants and other finance professionals, as a continuing program. We propose to do it every second Saturday, and I'm sure we have taken the mobile numbers and email addresses of each one of you. In case you have not provided, please do provide it at the registration counter so that these communications can come to you. While we'll fix the date, I think the location is something that we will keep it open depending on the availability. But mostly it is going to be every second Saturday, and time also we'll finalize will be our tryst with the messages which Swami had given. And also today for all the participants, we have a book on Study Circle. As Brother Shashank said, Study Circle is an opportunity where we can look at the past, not just read about what has been said, but also introspect, come up with different points of view. This book on Study Circle has various topics that can be picked up for discussion, and also it gives certain points of view which can be taken up for discussion. So please do collect it on your way out. So now we'll bring this session to a close with Mahamangala Harti. Sarvesh. Om Jai Jagadish Hare Swami Satya Sai Hare Bhakta Jana Samrakshaka Bhakta Jana Samrakshaka Parti Maheshwara Om Jai Jagadish Hare Shashivadana Shrikara Sarva Pranapate Swami Sarva Pranapate Ashrita Kalpalatika Ashrita Kalpalatika Apad Bandhava Om Jai Jagadish Hare Mata Pita Guru Deva Mumariyanta Unive Swami Mariyanta Unive Nada Brahma Jagannada Nada Brahma Jagannada Nagendra Shayana Om Jai Jagadish Hare Omkara Rupa Vojaya Shri Sai Mahadeva Satya Sai Mahadeva Mangala Harati Anduku Mangala Harati Anduku Mandara Giridhari Om Jai Jagadish Hare Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana 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 Om Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Om Jai Sadguru Deva Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana 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 Om Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Om Jai Sadguru Deva Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana 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 Om Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Satya Narayana Narayana Om Om Jai Sadguru Deva Om Shanti 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 Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Jai Bolo Bhagwan Shri Satya Sai Baba Ji Ki Jai.
Advocacy loved by one and all in India and abroad. Even before the phrase corporate social responsibility gained significance, it was textured into the group's value systems. And today, this phrase has been redefined by Mr. Murali as citizen social responsibility. Chennai 365 an effort by SKS in association with social, sports and cultural bodies to do good to a vibrant Chennai. To Sri Krishna Sweets, it's no mere rule. It's not just an act. It's every citizen's social responsibility. After all, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And in the process, create a world where life's best bonds are built with love and care. And in time, they will become our strongest bond.